The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club for what we anticipate will be the final session on this very important book, The Lost Mandate of Heaven, The American Betrayal of Diem, President of Vietnam, by Geoffrey Shaw. And we're really coming to the dramatic conclusion here. So I want to have Vivian kind of prepare for this with a little bit more background than we had before.
Right. Well, yes, we're leading up to the dramatic ending of this very tragic tale, and Joseph is going to lead us in that. But beforehand, I did a little research on Averell Harriman, because he has been kind of the nemesis of Diem all along, and the man, I would say, chiefly responsible for coming up with the plot that led to Diem's murder. And so we've kind of been speculating amongst ourselves, well, what made him tick and what was he doing and how did he get there, right? Kind of back and forth during the sessions. So I did a little bit of research, and I have my own little theory to contribute. And that is, he was the son of a railroad baron. And he was an East Coast, what we call in America, the East Coast Brahmin, the top leading families who had wealth and power. Their children went to the best schools. He went to one of the best all-boys boarding school, Groton, on the East Coast, went to Yale, joined all the clubs that the elite join at Yale, and he was heir to one of the largest fortunes in America at that time. And then he managed and expanded those businesses, rail, aviation, mining, you name it. He was involved, making lots of money. And during World War II, he was drawn upon to be one of the key negotiators with the Russians. As you know, the Russians were allies of the Americans. And he was at every single major conference involving the Russians, including the Yalta Conference. Wow. So we're talking about, how he sometimes was referred to as considered the elder statesman of the Democratic Party, because he really was. And it was because of the key role he played in that period that he was the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union starting in 1943 and beyond. And in 1948, he was in charge of the Marshall Plan. That was the plan by which we helped, the people stranded in East Germany and the rebuilding of West Germany. And so this man was really a formidable, experienced negotiator, diplomat, and so on.
And someone who, as you say, by being ambassador to the Soviet Union, was familiar with how the Soviets work, right, and what they do.
And he did not have the wool pulled over his eyes about Stalin at all. He knew very well what he was dealing with in dealing with Stalin and the Soviet Union under his control. He became the governor of New York in 1954, lost in 1958 to Nelson Rockefeller. And he ran for the Democratic primary nomination for president, both in 1952 and 1956. So by the time we get to the Kennedy administration, this guy is a big man, a big player in the Democratic Party, in American government, and in international affairs. So you can see the kind of esteem and power he would have had in Washington, especially with Kennedy, a young man. What was he? One of the youngest presidents ever. And so what Harriman said, he was a big man on campus. Okay. And so now this puzzling thing, why this animus between him and Diem? Why this, with that kind of greatness in men can also come a lot of arrogance, a lot of we know best. This puny little Vietnamese guy, what does he know about the Soviets. I know about the Soviets. I know about world affairs. He's just from some backwater rice paddy country. I mean, you can see, right, the kinds of attitudes that would sort of just kind of flow somewhat naturally. And now to have this man be resisting, no, I don't want to be pushed around by you. No, I don't want to be told by the United States of America how to run my own country. No, I don't want the United States of America to actually take over my military and run it for me. You can see how this would really set up a David and Goliath kind of situation. But unfortunately, in this situation, it's Goliath who wins.
And although David might be in heaven. So, there's a...
Can't have everything.
You'll be on the finishing line. It might still have a happy ending, but
the normal response of someone like that to someone like Diem is that, hey, we're paying for this. Don't give me the back talk. Don't give me pushback.
That's right. We're paying for it.
These are our troops there.
Although our troops weren't even there yet. I mean, by the time 1963 is still very early.
That's true.
We don't have lots of troops there. We have military advisors.
Yeah.
Okay. And but we really haven't sent ground troops yet.
That's the whole thing about the tension between plutocracy and democracy. Is that does the one with money have the right to treat everybody without money as a marionette? That's the issue here. At least one of the multifarious issues here. But thanks so much for that. I think that was very, very helpful. Did you fast forward to what he did afterwards? Did you do that part of the research as well?
I didn't. That, you know what? I neglected to do that. I just sort of
what his position was on world affairs in the 60s and the 70s or whatever, while he was still active in some way. But I can look that up myself. He's, as you say, he's a big name, and the almighty World Wide Web. I'm sure I can find out what I need to know. So
right. So yes, this leads us up to, well, as I said, I think we can say with some confidence that Harriman was the main player, and on the American side, diplomatically, and that he had a very direct role to play in the planning of the plot against Diem. And now Joseph is going to take us to where that ended up.
Yeah, so the whole of this book, of course, has been leading up to this climactic moment, the dastardly deed of the murder of Diem. And I thought perhaps we could just read most of page 267, which recounts the actual dastardly deed itself. So this is at the beginning of top page, that new paragraph on page 267. The coup took place on November the 1st, 1963, so All Saints' Day, with forces loyal to Diem deployed to the far-flung reaches of South Vietnam. Rebel forces sealed off military bases in the capital and proceeded to assault the presidential palace, where the coup leaders discovered Diem and Nhu had escaped during the night. The brothers had fled to the house of a friend in Cho Long. Early on November the 2nd, they attended Mass at the local church of St. Francis Xavier and spent some time afterwards in prayer, according to Father Clement Nguyen Van Thack, an eyewitness. The brothers were outside the church in the grotto of the Virgin Mary when General Big Duong Van Min's soldiers arrived with a couple of American jeeps and an armored personnel carrier. Sometime during that morning, General Min, the leader of the coup, had been informed that the No Din brothers were at the church. He made the plan to capture both brothers there and gave a direct order to his bodyguard to murder them. Once Diem and Nhu were secured in the hold of the personnel carrier, Min's order was carried out promptly as the vehicle was driven away. The executioner, Major Nguyen Van Nung, cut out their gallbladders while they were still alive and then shot them. Years later, visibly distraught at recalling the murder, General Nguyen Khan said, Nhu was alive when they put the knife in to take out some of the organs, the gallbladder. And in the Orient, when you are a big soldier, big man, this thing is very important. They do it against Nhu when Nhu was alive. and Diem had this happen to him, and later on they killed him by pistol and rifle. This is murder, a real murder. It's very savage, très sauvage. So I think, we could probably end the narrative part of it there. There's a few other right at the end we could talk about that, but it reminded me, in fact, that today, as we record this, is the feast of St. Henry Morse, one of the English martyrs who died in 1645. And the common way of killing the English martyrs was hanging, drawing, quartering, which involved disemboweling prior to being killed. So really, they suffered something very similar. These two brothers, it should horrify us. And obviously, we've seen all the evidence of American collusion in the plan to bring this about. And beyond that, I don't know that has anything else I can say. So I've got one or two things. There's some things on page 268, but perhaps I'll pass it back to you folks first.
Well, this on the next page, according to Min, who I'm trying to back up to find out now which one is Min in his speaking with. But in any case, the Americans
the leader of the coup, I think.
The Americans not only expected. Yes, Min was the guy who led the coup. Okay, and according to him, the Americans not only expected the murder but wanted it, because, as we know, when this made the news and so on, there was a lot of, oh, we didn't know he was going to be killed and this kind of thing. And then Min explains they had to be killed. Why? Because they were popular. That's so funny that he says, they were respected. They were too much respected among simple, gullible people in the countryside, especially the Catholics and the refugees. Oh, the simple, gullible people in the countryside, who are the very people on the front lines of a guerrilla insurgency being conducted by the Viet Cong. Oh, he was popular among them? Really?
Also 90% of the population.
Yes, correct. Yes. And so the fact that the leader of the coup, in justifying what he did, uses this, this only verifies everything Shaw has been saying about the kind of leader Diem was and where the support for him came from and why.
Normally you'd have the excuse he had to be killed because he was unpopular, he was a tyrant, and therefore it was the will of the people he should be removed. He's actually saying he had to be killed because he was not a tyrant, because he was popular with the people, and that's why he had to be killed.
Right, because otherwise, given his popularity with the rank and file, he might have been able to make a comeback.
Right.
And to see to it that he's good and gone for good, well, you got to kill him.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they said at the bottom of that paragraph on 268. The generals knew very well that having no talent, no moral virtues, no political support whatsoever, they could not prevent a spectacular comeback of the president and Mr. New if they were alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we have it from the mouths of the people who did this.
On to the conclusion? I've got a couple things on the conclusion there.
Well, actually, Father, just before we get to that, immediately after what you just read, I think this is important. The person who just said what you just quoted about the generals who had no talent, no moral virtues, no political support, and basically that Diem would make a spectacular comeback if he wasn't killed. That person was an enemy, political enemy of Diem. Huang's testimony is especially significant because he had been jailed by Diem's government for participating in the Caravelists. He was no friend of the No Diem brothers. In other words, this is not someone who's trying to justify Diem because he's a friend or an ally or a supporter. He's an enemy, and he says that. So, this is about as objective a judgment as you could hope for.
You have something here on page 269?
Well, I do, but so do you. So why don't you?
No, I'm on the next page.
Oh. Well, it's interesting. I think I mentioned this in an earlier recording. This quote from Lyndon Johnson. So as we know, 3 weeks after this, President Kennedy is himself assassinated. And so that means his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, becomes president and now inherits this mess, right? And this quote from him on page 269, it's a recorded telephone conversation with a senator. And LBJ says, "We killed him. We all got together and got a blankety blank bunch of thugs, and we went in and assassinated him. Now we've really had no political stability since then," which is exactly why all the heads of states told the Kennedy administration not to do this. Remember in our last session, we went down the list: Australia, France, the Philippines, Britain,
Italy, I think.
they, all saying, don't do this. You're going to create a worse situation. And then, not to mention, our own top military men saying, yeah, we wish we had somebody else, but we don't have anybody else. And if you take him out, it's going to be chaos. And the CIA said the same thing. So here you had this whole chorus of voices all saying what LBJ says here: we've had no political stability since then. And
Yeah.
I looked up this quote, and sure enough, I found it at the University of Virginia, Richmond Library. They have the audio files from the LBJ presidency, and I heard it myself.
Wow. Well, I mean, before that, at the beginning, I said, Father, you said you're on the next page. So if I can jump in, I'm still on page 269 here. It's interesting. Rufus Phillips, right at the beginning of the conclusion, the CIA operative who had met Diem just a few days before he was murdered, said, "I wanted to sit down and cry. And I was so upset when I heard that he'd been killed. That was a stupid decision. And God, we paid. They paid. Everybody paid." And then Madame knew, and we know obviously she shoots from the lip, rather than shoot from the hip. Whoever has the Americans as allies does not need any enemies. I can predict to you all that the story in Vietnam is only at its beginning. Her words proved to be prescient.
She actually went to President Kennedy's funeral and walked right up to Jackie Kennedy, the president's widow, and said, "So now you know."
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine?
Wow.
I mean,
wow.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, it is like a Shakespearean drama, isn't it? It's
it is.
All these characters and
all we need, because it's like Hamlet with Diem. We just need someone at the end to say, "May flights of angels sing him to his rest," and then we're all good at that point.
Yeah.
The next page, you've got the same thing marked out I do. So once you do it.
Well, echoing or backing up what LBJ just said, at the bottom of the first paragraph, the rancor spilled over into all of the ruling junta's appointments and dealings, thus leaving it weak and vulnerable. The situation invited an overthrow, which occurred in 1964. The very next year, the regime we put into power is overthrown. And that same year, is that what you were going to bring out? That same year, that's when Nolting resigned? What did you want to say about that?
Also in 1964, Frederick Nolting resigned from the State Department in protest over the coup in South Vietnam. That's the thing.
And his note, his letter, his resignation letter, that my decision has been influenced by my strong disapproval of certain actions which were taken last fall in relation to Vietnam, with predictable adverse consequences. I do not deny, nor do I deny that I've been uncomfortable in my association with the Department of State since returning from Vietnam 6 months ago.
Yeah, and then as regards the adverse consequences, of course, we hadn't seen anything yet. Nolting's words below that, the conclusion of them at the top of page 271, let the statistics speak for themselves. 57,000 American lives, 8 years of dissension in our country, huge increases in public debt, and the inflation that afflicted us throughout the 1970s. the actions of the Kennedy administration set the stage for all this. And of course, it doesn't even mention the 3 million Vietnamese.
Right.
who
2
died.
million civilians, 1 million North Vietnamese soldiers and Viet Cong fighters, 200,000 South Vietnamese soldiers. You know,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. We all, if we have a decent relationship with our Lord, go through our lives with pangs of conscience for the sins that we've committed and their consequences. I just can't even imagine what those people who made these decisions that then saw the consequences, if they have consciences, well, how they live with it.
And I know there's some benevolent motivations behind it, but America seems to want to go into these countries and help, where we suffer very little, and we devastate the country and leave it.
Mhm.
On page 272 at the top, when Nolting started to go public with his views on the coup, he maintained that the ultimate responsibility for America's actions lay with President John F. Kennedy and Secretary of State Dean Rusk. Rusk claimed that he'd asked Nolting to stay on in Saigon, that Nolting was the one who insisted on going home. Another LB,
Right.
lying, you know what.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
They're always covering their you know what's.
I have my concluding sentence, but do you have a conclusion there?
No, I mean, let you do it.
Well, this is interesting because 272, the very last sentence in the conclusion here, they affirm what Joseph Cardinal Frings, the Archbishop of Cologne, stated in 1965. Now, in 1965, Cardinal Frings was at the Vatican Council with his Peritus, Father Joseph Ratzinger.
What do you know about that?
And Frings says, the greater part of the world has not given just recognition of this noble man. We've tried. But did you want to go back to Father Shaw's introduction or not?
I don't think we need to. It's and we've gone our time.
Okay.
So unless Joseph, you
Well, I tell you what, just by way of adding emphasis to that final sentence from Joseph Cardinal Frings that Father read, we can read it again if you allow me to read the last of this concluding paragraph, because this
Sure.
is the paragraph, of course, that with which Shaw ends the book, and it also ends with the sentence the Father just read, so we can read it again. Because this is Shaw's final ultimate conclusion. As for No Din Diem, General Nguyen Khan told this writer that most of the Buddhists he knew who were in full support of the coup, and even of the subsequent killing of the man, changed their minds in the intervening decades and came to regard his murder as a mistake of unparalleled proportions for South Vietnam. Catholic Vietnamese, as noted in the beginning of this work, venerate the memory of President Diem. They affirm what Joseph Cardinal Frings, the Archbishop of Cologne, stated in 1965. The greater part of the world has not given just recognition of this noble man.
Wonderful book. Important book. Thank you, Vivian, for leading us, and we will.
And thank you, Jeffrey Shaw, for writing it.
Yes.
May you rest in peace. I told you he just died recently.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
Yeah.
he just died recently of cancer, and he was on the youngish side of things. So may he rest in peace.
Amen. Thanks, everyone. We will begin the next session with this book by Father Robert Spitzer, Society of Jesus, Science at the Doorstep of God. It's actually volume 1 of kind of a 2-volume series here. Science and Reason in Support of God, the Soul, and Life After Death. So we'll see you next week.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.